All right, this is Chapter 8, Gestalt Therapy Part 2 for Counseling 4500. All right, the therapeutic process and therapeutic goals, not a goal-oriented methodology per se. There are 6 methodological components, though. Number 1 is that it is a continuum of experience. You're going to keep on experiencing what's going on. We're talking about the here and now. 3 is a paradoxical theory of change, which we talked about earlier, is to be yourself, right? 4 is experiment. 5 is the authentic encounter. And 6 is a process-oriented diagnosis. So we want to move towards increased awareness of you, okay? Gradually assume ownership of your experience, develop skills, and acquire values that will allow you to satisfy your needs without violating the rights of other people. So what you're doing is you're being yourself, but also being respectful of the surroundings. Become more aware of all your senses. Learn to accept responsibilities for what you do and the consequences that happens from those things that you have chosen to do. And be able to ask for help and get help from others and be able to give to others as well. The therapist's function and role to invite the clients into an active partnership where they can learn about themselves. Go through experiments and try out new behaviors and see what happens and increase their awareness, freedom, and self-direction. So this is, kind of like their version of building rapport, right? Building a trusting relationship where the place where you're having, let's say, therapy is a safe space. And from there, then you can then try to change or experiment with changes, which can be very, very scary for some of your clients. Paying attention to the client's body or body language, gaps in attention and awareness. So suddenly, they might lose concentration. Let's figure out why. Put that into your notes. And then incongruities between verbalizations and body language. So that means, the things that you do, the behaviors and the things that you say should match up. So let's talk about it when it doesn't match up. All right, language, it talk. And this is again familiar with the existentialist conversation we talked about before with the I, it, I, thou. When clients say it instead of I, it depersonalizes that language. So people might say, it is difficult to make friends. But is it? In real life, if you talk to people, some of them will say, no, it's actually very easy to make friends. So when you say it is difficult to make friends, you're kind of depersonalizing it. You're not taking ownership of it. Instead, we would want you to say, I have trouble making friends, so that you take ownership. You're aware that it's you that we need to work on right now, not just, making an excuse or making the logical or rationalize it so that it's kind of like telling everyone, oh yeah, it's really hard to make friends when, actually depending on the person, it might not be. So there you go from that. You talk, global and impersonal language tends to keep the person hidden. So you might say like, how it feels to be like this. No, because everyone has a different way of seeing the world, right? So you need to now own the I talk again. All right. Questions keep the person hidden, safe, and unknown. So when you ask questions, you're not really standing up for who you are, defining yourself. Language that denies power, tendency to deny the personal power by adding qualifiers or disclaimers. Qualifiers or disclaimers are things like maybe, perhaps, sort of, I guess, possibly, I suppose, or replacing I can't with I won't. Okay. So instead of saying, I want our relationship to work out, you might just say, maybe we can make this relationship work out. So what happens is that it gives it an option as opposed to you have decided that you're going to want to work on this and then we're going to work on it. When you say maybe, you may be like, oh, well, yeah, I wanted to, but maybe we don't have to. So it becomes, again, very much denying that power that we're talking about, denying, what your real goals are and how you're really, really feeling about the relationship right now. Listening to clients' metaphors, rich clues to client struggles. So for example, it is hard for me to spill my guts in here, or I don't feel like I have a leg to stand on, or I feel like I have a hole in my soul. So you want to listen to those things and actually talk to them about that. What does it mean to have a hole in your soul? Talk to me, describe it, exactly what that means, so that we all understand exactly what you're saying. Because these are kind of like sayings that people use, right? But how much are they really feeling those things, or are they just going on by saying these things? You want to have them maybe even act out, what does it feel like to have a whole, like what the whole say to you as a person. All right, listening for language that uncovers a story. That's called fleshing out a flash. Use language that is elusive yet gives significant clues to a story that illustrates their life struggle. So that's kind of like using like a lot of words. But what we want to do is understand what those words all mean to you. Okay, because sometimes people say big pictures or ideas or dreams or whatever that they have, but we want to boil it down to what does it really mean. The alert therapist will ask questions that will help them flesh out their storyline so they can understand what's going on. All right, now let's talk about the client's experience in therapy. Dialogue is very important. 3 stages of integration sequence is the discovery, and then the accommodation, and then the assimilation. So discovery is the new realization about themselves or others. So you might be living life not realizing all the ways that you make yourself, let's say, unhappy, or you make bad choices, right? So now we're realizing, oh, we are making choices for everything in our lives. So that realization is really helpful, because then you're like, oh, so when I do this, it means that this. When I do this, the consequences are this, right? So you're realizing that everything that we do is a choice, and we need to be aware of that. Accommodations is recognizing that they have a choice. So let's work with what we have, right? So if this is going on, let's accommodate by figuring out what we need to do next. Assimilation is learning how to influence their environment, feeling more capable. So once you start to understand what's going on in your surroundings, your environment, then we can start working on those things and making sure that those things are giving you a happier life, a healthier, happier life. All right, now let's talk about the relationship between the therapist and the client. The therapist is responsible for the quality of their presence, knowing themselves and the client, and remaining open to the client. So right there, as the educated, experienced person that you are, you might be considered kind of like the anchor at the moment, so that they understand that you're going to be aware of what's going on, and you're going to basically bring it up if you see something that's inconsistent. Applications, therapeutic techniques, and procedures. First thing we want to talk about is the experiment in Gestalt therapy. So there are techniques, and then there are experiments in Gestalt therapy, and we're going to talk about each of those. You're going to want to try these things out and see what it's like for you, or at least that's what we would say, because we're inviting a person to try these things out and see if it makes sense in your life. Exercises are ready-made techniques that are sometimes used to make something happen in a therapy session or to achieve a goal. So those are things, let's work it out, let's try it out and see what's going on. Let's see how it works when it comes to a Gestalt exercise. Experiments, on the other hand, is a method that shifts that focus of counseling from talking about a topic to an activity that will heighten the client's awareness and understanding through experience. So active self-exploration. So it's an activity. Okay. Experiments are one of a kind and relevant to the current client. So they're very specific to your specific client because of the relationship and the problems that they're dealing with, right? So here are some options or some considerations. Imagining a threatening future encounter, and then having that be the actual experiment that you're going to do. Setting up a dialogue between a client and some significant person in his or her or their life. Dramatizing out a memory of a painful event. Reliving a particularly profound early experience in the present. Assume the identity of parental figure through role playing. Focus on posture, gesture, and nonverbals. Or carrying on a dialogue between 2 conflicting aspects within a person. Important for new beginners to experience Gestalt experiments. So again, you're going to talk to them, get them used to it. Beginners need to feel comfortable suggesting experiments to their clients. So that means you, as a therapist, when you're training, you have to be comfortable experimenting with this, because you need to be enthusiastic about what's going on. You really need to mean what you say, right? Clients should be introduced to this framework since it requires trust. Some clients will laugh because they feel silly. Some will be taught culturally not to share emotions, and some will be afraid of losing control when they go through this experiment. So again, you have to be aware of them, gauge, understand, and hopefully this will work because you understand how it matches up. All right, the role of confrontation. Pearls practice a highly confrontational approach as a way to deal with avoidance. Contemporary Gestalt is more collaborative and less abrasive. So again, it's a little bit less confrontational, respectful of the client still. It's just seen a little bit less abrasive, like less harsh. Confrontation is invited to examine their behaviors, attitudes, and thoughts. All right, now let's talk about some of the Gestalt therapy interventions. You want to gain fuller awareness, experience internal conflicts, resolve inconsistencies, working through an impasse that completes life's unfinished business. So one of the first things that we talk about is internal dialogue exercise. That's bringing back parts of the self that have been disowned or denied. Those are the splits that happen in your life. Okay, so kind of like dealing with, again, those ego defense mechanisms of avoidance or denial. We're going to really work on those things here. So there's the top dog, underdog mentality. So top dog is the authoritarian, demanding, bossy, and manipulative things that you hear, like you should do this or you ought to do this. The underdog plays the victim. So they make excuses, kind of like your inner saboteur, which is, the person inside you sometimes ruins everything, just because it's there and you think about it and you're like, whatever it is. So there might be this constant struggle. So we want you to experience that top dog, underdog experience. Empty chair technique is probably his most famous when it comes to techniques. It's using two chairs. The therapist will ask the client to sit in one chair and be fully the top dog, and then shift to the other chair to become the underdog, so that you can really fully experience the conflict. And we can see this when, let's say that you have a fight with a family member. One person will be you, and then let's walk you through it, have a conversation with the other person. And then you're going to take a moment and then go over to the other person and then talk to you like the other person. So that allows you to understand multiple perspectives of what's going on. And that's what he means by fully experiencing the conflict. The goal of the empty chair technique is to reduce disassociating with the feeling and higher integration between the two opposites, and to accept that both sides exist. Yeah, because sometimes you don't realize the reasons why people are mean to you, let's say, right? Maybe they're not necessarily trying to be mean to you. They're actually trying to protect you. But you see it as, you feel as though that is something that that person's being mean to, but really it isn't. Making the rounds. Asking a person in a group to go up to others in the group and either speak to or do something with each person. So it's kind of like a round robin, right? Because this way you're being forced to go through a bunch of people, and some of them might be uncomfortable, some of them might be comfortable, so that you can understand what's going on, that life is not all one way, right? So you want to confront risks, disclose to the self, to experiment with new behaviors, and to grow and to change. The reversal exercise is symptoms and behaviors often represent reversals of underlying impulses. For example, here, ask them to be the opposite of who they appear to be. So shy person becomes an exhibitionist. An exhibition is just a fancy word for like enjoying when people look at you, right? So instead of being shy, be that other person in the safe space and see how it feels. So hopefully what we're hoping is that they're going to maybe end up meeting somewhere in the middle. So they're not too shy, but they're not an exhibitionist as well, but just kind of like in the middle, typical. All right, the rehearsal exercise. Usually we rehearse silently to ourselves. By rehearsing with a therapist out loud, the client realizes the preparatory means that are needed. Yeah, that's very true. I always tell this with my students. Let's say when you do a presentation, you need to actually talk it out loud, because sometimes we just visualize it in our heads and then we're like, oh yeah, it's great. But then when you actually do it, then you don't realize all the things that you needed to work on. Maybe the sentence was a little clumsy. We need to clean up that or rewrite that sentence. Or we don't realize how long it takes to do our presentation or whatever. So we need to learn how to, let's say, increase the speed or take out some of the materials. All right, the exaggeration exercise. More aware of the subtle signs and cues clients are sending out through their bodies. Exaggerating the body will intensify the emotion associated and gives it more meaning. Wow. Yeah. So I think the famous thing that Gestalt does is he'll see someone, let's say, shaking their leg. So it's like, what are you doing right now? And then they might say something like shaking their leg. and then he might have them like shake their leg even more. That brings us to the here and now because we're focusing on what's happening right now at this moment. But it also starts to go, well, why are you doing that? If you're nervous or whatever, let's talk about that nervousness. Why is that, coming out as a body experience or a bodily, movement, right? So when I experience those things and really understand what our body is telling us. Okay, staying with that feeling. When a client states that he or she or they are not feeling comfortable, ask the client to stay in that discomfort. Shows ability to deal with something the client wants to avoid, so it's unblocking it, right? So you're feeling uncomfortable. Let's experience it and see why that's happening. So once we can figure out that, then maybe we can now figure out other things as well in our lives. All right, now there's also the Gestalt approach to dream work. Does not interpret or analyze the dream. Instead, you bring the dreams back to life and relive them as though they are happening right now. So you're going to act these things out in the present moment. The client will act out all the different characters in the dream. The dreams represent an unfinished situation and contains an existential message about the self. So for example here, let's say the client says that they had a dream where someone was chasing them and they were running, right? And then they trip on a rock or something like that, let's say. So the therapist might ask the client to go, well, let's act out you as a person running away. Let's also now act out the person chasing you and have them talk as well. But let's also have you act out being the rock. Why was there a rock that tripped you and made you fall, right? That seems like a very important part of your dream. So let's experiment and have that rock talk and say what the rock wants to say. All right, applications to group counseling. Well suited for group therapy. Anxiety can be acted out in the group. Good for collectivist cultures because they are working as a group. When it comes to multicultural perspective, the strengths are, if timed appropriately, good with culturally diverse populations. Techniques can be manipulated to accommodate different cultures. Good at bringing opposites within the self together. Opposites because you're going, remember the empty chair technique. You're being one, you're being the other. So top dog, underdog, or whatever it is, so that you can sort of see like both sides. Being shy versus being an exhibitionist, right? Bicultural individuals who struggle with both sides of their family. Shortcomings are if introduced too quickly, it can bring some very intense feelings. May not work for cultures that are not open to expressing emotions. And I believe this is the end of the lecture. Thank you. Bye-bye.